The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Episode 1. Narrated by Wormhole Podcast. Chapter 1. In my younger years, my father gave me some advice that stuck with me. He said, "Whenever you feel like criticizing anyone, just remember that not everyone has had the same advantages you've had." He didn't elaborate, but I knew he meant a lot more than that. Because of this, I tend to hold back my judgments. It's a habit that has opened my eyes to many curious people, but it also made me a target for a few bores. You see, abnormal minds pick up on this quality in normal folks. In college, I was even accused of being political because I listened to the secret troubles of wild, unknown men. Most of these confessions were unsolicited. I often pretended to be busy or asleep when I sensed someone was about to share something personal. Because, let's face it, young men often express their feelings in the same tired ways. But reserving judgment? It's a matter of endless hope. I sometimes worry I'll miss something important if I forget that, as my father suggested, not everyone is born with the same sense of decency. Now, I'll admit my tolerance has its limits. Behavior can be built on solid ground or shaky mud, but there comes a point where I just don't care what it's built on. When I returned from the East last autumn, I wanted the world to be orderly and morally upright forever. I wanted no more wild adventures that gave me a glimpse into people's hearts. Only Gatsby, the man who gives this book its name, was exempt from my feelings. Gatsby represented everything I secretly despised. If personality is a series of successful gestures, Gatsby had something beautiful about him. He had a sensitivity to life's promises, like one of those complicated machines that detect earthquakes far away. This wasn't just the usual artistic temperament, it was a remarkable gift for hope. I've never met anyone else quite like him. Gatsby turned out all right in the end, but it was what preyed on him, this foul dust that floated in the wake of his dreams, that made me lose interest in the disappointments of people. My family has been well off in our Midwestern city for 3 generations. The Carraways are a sort of clan, and there's even a story that we're descended from the Dukes of Buccleuch. But my real ancestor was my great-uncle, who came here in '51, sent a substitute to the Civil War, and started a wholesale hardware business that my father runs now. I've never met this great-uncle, but I'm told I resemble him, especially the rather stern painting of him in my father's office. I graduated from New Haven in 1915, just a quarter century after my father. Soon after, I joined in on the delayed migration known as the Great War. I came back restless, feeling that the Midwest had become the ragged edge of the universe. So, I decided to head east and learn about the bond business. Everyone I knew was in bonds, so I figured it could support one more man. My aunts and uncles discussed it as if they were picking a prep school for me. Finally, they agreed, and my father offered to finance me for a year. After some delays, I moved out east in the spring of '22. Initially, I was supposed to find a room in the city, but it was a warm season, and I had just left a land of wide lawns and friendly trees. So, when a young man at the office suggested we share a house in a nearby town, it felt like a brilliant idea. He found a weather-beaten bungalow for $80 a month, but at the last minute, he got sent to Washington. So, I ended up in the country alone. I had a dog for a few days until he ran away, and an old Dodge car. I also had a Finnish woman who cooked and cleaned, muttering Finnish wisdom to herself on the electric stove. It felt lonely for a day or so until one morning a man stopped me on the road. "How do you get to West Egg Village?" he asked, looking lost. I told him, and just like that, I was no longer lonely. I had become a guide, a pathfinder, an original settler. He had given me a sense of belonging in the neighborhood. With the sunshine and blooming leaves, I felt like life was beginning anew with the summer. There was so much to read and so much fresh air to enjoy. I bought a dozen books on banking and investment, and they sat on my shelf like new money, promising secrets only a wealthy few knew. I intended to read many books. I was quite literary in college. It was chance that led me to rent a house in one of the strangest communities in North America. West Egg is a slender island due east of New York, with two unusual land formations. 20 miles from the city, two enormous eggs jut out into Long Island Sound. They aren't perfect ovals, and their resemblance must confuse the seagulls flying overhead. But the real surprise? Their differences were striking. I lived in West Egg, the less fashionable of the two. My house was at the very tip, only 50 yards from the Sound, squeezed between two gigantic mansions that rented for $12,000 or $15,000 a season. The mansion on my right was a colossal imitation of a French hôtel de ville, all new with a thin veil of ivy. It had a marble pool and more than 40 acres of grounds. That was Gatsby's mansion. I didn't know him yet, but I felt his presence. My own house was a small eyesore, but it had been overlooked. I had a view of the water, a partial view of my neighbor's lawn, and the comforting closeness of millionaires, all for $80 a month. Across the bay, the fashionable white palaces of East Egg glittered. That's where the story begins, on the evening I drove over to have dinner with the Buchanans. Daisy is my second cousin once removed, and I knew Tom from college. A little while after the war, I spent a few days with them in Chicago. Tom was a powerful football player at New Haven, a big deal. His family was very wealthy, and even back then he spent money freely. Now he'd come east with a string of polo ponies from Lake Forest. It was hard to believe a guy my age could be so rich. Why they came east? I have no idea. They spent a year in France for no particular reason, and drifted here and there, looking for social spots. Tom had said this was a permanent move, but I didn't buy it. I couldn't see into Daisy's heart, but I felt Tom would always search for the thrill of the football games he used to love. So, on a warm, windy evening, I drove over to East Egg to see two old friends I barely knew. Their house was even more elaborate than I expected. It was a bright red and white Georgian colonial, overlooking the bay. The lawn stretched from the beach to the front door, filled with sundials, brick paths, and vibrant gardens. Finally, at the house, Tom Buchanan stood on the porch in riding clothes. He had changed since college. Now he was a sturdy man of 30, with a hard mouth and a superior attitude. His eyes were sharp and aggressive, making him seem like he was always ready for a fight. Even his fancy clothes couldn't hide his physical strength. His voice was gruff, adding to the impression he gave of being rough around the edges. There was a touch of authority in his voice, even toward people he liked. We talked briefly on the sunny porch. "I've got a nice place here," he said, looking around. He turned me and gestured at the view, showcasing his sunken Italian garden, a half-acre of roses, and a boat bobbing nearby. "It belonged to Domain, the oil man," he said abruptly. "Let's go inside." We walked through a bright hallway into a rosy room filled with light. The breeze pushed the curtains in and out, like flags waving, across the wine-colored rug. The only still object was a huge couch on which two young women lounged as if floating. They wore white dresses that fluttered like they were caught in the wind. I must have stood there for a moment, listening to the rustling curtains and the creaking picture on the wall. Then Tom closed the rear windows and the wind stopped, bringing a quiet to the room. One of the young women was a stranger to me. She lay on the couch, still as a statue, chin raised as if balancing something. If she noticed me, she didn't show it, and I almost felt the urge to apologize for interrupting her. Daisy, however, attempted to rise, leaning forward with an eager expression. Then she laughed, an absurd, charming laugh, and I laughed too, stepping closer. "I'm paralyzed with happiness," she said. That made me smile. She looked up at me, making it feel like I was the most important person in her world. That was just how she was. She mentioned the other girl's last name was Baker. I'd heard people say Daisy's soft murmur was just to draw people closer to her attention. Miss Baker nodded at me almost imperceptibly before tipping her head back again. I was about to apologize for interrupting when Daisy started asking me questions with her low, thrilling voice. Her voice was like music, pulling me in, and her face, so lovely and bright, held a hint of sadness. There was a spark in her voice, something unforgettable from all the men who cared for her. I told her about my stop in Chicago and how everyone sent their love. "Do they miss me?" she asked joyfully. "The whole town is desolate," I replied with a grin. "All the cars have the left rear wheel painted black as a mourning wreath, and there's a whale all night along the North Shore." "How gorgeous! Let's go back, Tom, tomorrow." Then she said, "You ought to see the baby." "I'd like to," I said, curious. "She's asleep. She's 2 years old. Haven't you ever seen her?" "Never," I replied. "Well, you should." Just then, Tom, who had been hovering around, rested a heavy hand on my shoulder. "What are you doing, Nick?" "I'm a bond man," I replied. I told him, and he responded, "Never heard of them." This got on my nerves a bit. "You will," I replied sharply. "Oh, I'll stay in the East, don't you worry," he said, glancing at Daisy as if looking for something more. "I'd be a goddamned fool to live anywhere else." At that, Miss Baker suddenly said, "Absolutely," making me jump. It was the first thing she had said since I arrived. Evidently, she surprised herself too, for she yawned and stood up. "I'm stiff," she complained. "I've been lying on that sofa forever." "Don't look at me," Daisy replied. "I've been trying to get you to New York all afternoon." "No thanks," said Miss Baker. "I'm absolutely in training." Tom looked at her incredulously. "You are?" He raised his drink as if it were the last drop in a glass. "How do you ever get anything done?" I couldn't help but wonder what it was that Miss Baker got done. I enjoyed looking at her. She was slender, with a proud posture, but her eyes held a polite curiosity and a hint of discontent. "You live in West Egg," she said, almost with disdain. "I know somebody there." "I don't know anyone." "You must know Gatsby." "Gatsby?" I repeated, confused. "What Gatsby?" Before I could explain that he was my neighbor, dinner was announced, and Tom took my arm in a commanding way, leading me from the room. The two young women, both graceful and languid, led us out onto a rosy-colored porch. 4 candles flickered on the table, illuminated by the fading light. "Why candles?" Daisy frowned, snapping them out. "In 2 weeks, it'll be the longest day of the year." She looked at us, her expression radiant. "Do you always watch for the longest day and then miss it?" "I always do." "We ought to plan something," Miss Baker yawned, settling into her chair as if getting ready for bed. "All right," Daisy replied. "What shall we plan?" She turned to me helplessly. "What do people plan?" Before I could respond, Daisy's gaze fell to her little finger. "Look," she complained. "I hurt it." We all looked, noticing the knuckle was bruised. "You did it, Tom," she exclaimed accusingly. "I know you didn't mean to, but you did. That's what I get for marrying a brute of a man, a great big hulking physical specimen of a—" "I hate that word hulking," Tom retorted angrily. "Hulking," Daisy insisted. Sometimes she and Miss Baker would speak at once, with a cool banter that felt effortless, as if they were accepting Tom and me without much care. They knew dinner would soon end, and the evening would fade away, casually set aside. It was different from the West, where evenings hurried along, brimming with anticipation or dread. "You make me feel uncivilized, Daisy," I confessed, sipping on my second glass of a rather impressive claret. "Can't you talk about crops or something?" I didn't mean anything by it, but it sparked an unexpected reaction. "Civilization's going to pieces," Tom exploded. "I've become a terrible pessimist about things. Have you read The Rise of the Colored Empires by this man Goddard?" "Why, no," I replied, surprised by his sudden intensity. "Well, it's a fine book, and everyone should read it. The idea is that if we don't watch out, the white race will be utterly submerged. It's all scientific work. It's been proven." "Tom's getting very profound," Daisy noted, a hint of sad amusement in her voice. "He reads deep books with long words in them. What was that word we—" "Well, these books are scientific," Tom insisted, looking at her impatiently. "This fellow has worked it all out. It's up to us, the dominant race, to keep control." Daisy winked at me, saying, "We've got to beat them down." "Maybe you ought to live in California," Miss Baker began, but Tom interrupted, shifting in his chair. "This idea is that we're Nordics. I am, and you are, and—" He nodded slightly toward Daisy, who winked at me again. "We've produced everything that makes civilization, science, art, all that. Do you see?" There was something sad about his concentration, as if his confidence wasn't enough anymore. Just then, the telephone rang inside, and the butler left the porch. Daisy seized the moment, leaning toward me. "I'll share a family secret," she whispered. "It's about the butler's nose. Want to hear it?" "That's why I came tonight." "Well, he wasn't always a butler. He used to polish silver for a rich family in New York with an enormous silver service. He had to polish it all day until it started affecting his nose." "Things went from bad to worse," interjected Miss Baker. "Yes, until he finally had to give up his position." For a moment, the last sunshine bathed Daisy's face, making her glow. Her voice was captivating, urging me to listen, but then, as quickly as it appeared, the glow faded and her excitement dimmed. The butler returned and whispered something to Tom, who frowned and abruptly left. As if this absence ignited something in her, Daisy leaned forward again, her voice brightening. "I love having you at my table, Nick. You remind me of a rose, an absolute rose, doesn't he?" She turned to Miss Baker for confirmation. This was untrue. I didn't resemble a rose at all. She was just improvising, but warmth radiated from her, as if her heart was trying to reach out to me. Suddenly, she threw her napkin on the table and excused herself, heading into the house. Miss Baker and I exchanged a glance devoid of meaning, but I was about to speak when she suddenly said, "Shh," in a warning tone. A quiet, passionate murmur was audible from the room, and Miss Baker leaned forward, eager to hear. The murmur rose and fell, finally fading away completely. "This Mr. Gatsby you spoke of is my neighbor," I mentioned. "Don't talk. I want to hear what happens." "Is something happening?" I asked innocently. "You mean to say you don't know?" Miss Baker said, genuinely surprised. "I thought everyone knew." "I don't. Tom has some woman in New York." "Got some woman?" I repeated, baffled. Miss Baker nodded. "She might have the decency not to call him at dinner time, don't you think?" Just as I began to grasp her meaning, Tom and Daisy returned to the table. "It couldn't be helped," Daisy said, her tone upbeat but slightly forced. She sat down, looking closely at Miss Baker and then at me. "I looked outdoors for a minute, and it's very romantic out there. There's a bird on the lawn that must be a nightingale, come over on the Cunard or White Star line. He's singing away," and then sang, "It's romantic, isn't it, Tom?" "Very romantic," he answered, looking miserable. "If it's light enough after dinner, I want to take you down to the stables." The telephone rang inside, startling us, and Daisy decisively shook her head at Tom. The subject of the stables and all other topics vanished into thin air. As the dinner broke apart, I remember the candles being lit again for no apparent reason, and I felt a need to look everyone in the eye while avoiding their gazes. I couldn't tell what Daisy and Tom were thinking, but even Miss Baker, who seemed so composed, couldn't shake the unsettling atmosphere. To someone with a different temperament, this situation might have felt intriguing, but I felt the urge to call the police. The horses, needless to say, weren't mentioned again. Tom and Miss Baker strolled back inside, and I followed Daisy around to the porch to sit together. Daisy took her face in her hands, as if appreciating her beauty, and her eyes drifted into the darkening evening. "We don't know each other very well, Nick," she suddenly said. "Even if we are cousins, you didn't come to my wedding." "I wasn't back from the war," I replied. "True," she hesitated. "Well, I've had a very hard time, Nick, and I'm pretty cynical about everything." Evidently, she had her reasons. I waited, but she didn't continue, so I returned to the topic of her daughter. "I suppose she talks and eats and everything?" "Oh, yes." She looked at me absent-mindedly. "Listen, Nick, let me tell you what I said when she was born. Would you like to hear?" "Very much," I replied. "It'll show you how I feel about things. Well, she was less than an hour old, and Tom was God knows where. I woke up out of the ether with an abandoned feeling and asked the nurse if it was a boy or a girl. She told me it was a girl, and I turned my head away and cried. 'All right,' I said, 'I'm glad it's a girl, and I hope she'll be a fool. That's the best thing a girl can be in this world, a beautiful little fool.' You see, I think everything's terrible anyway," she continued, a little too convinced. "Everyone thinks so, the most advanced people, and I know. I've been everywhere and seen everything." Her eyes flashed around, filled with defiance, like Tom's. Then she laughed with a hint of scorn. "Sophisticated. God, I'm sophisticated." The instant her voice trailed off, losing its influence, I felt a strange insincerity in her words. It made me uncomfortable, as if the whole evening was a trick to draw out an emotion from me. I waited, and sure enough, she soon looked at me with a sly smile, as if she had just revealed her secret membership in a certain elite club. Inside, the crimson room burst with light. Tom and Miss Baker sat at opposite ends of a long couch, and she read to him from the Saturday Evening Post, her voice blending into a soothing tune. When we entered, She held up her hand. "To be continued," she said, tossing the magazine on the table. Rising, she stretched and announced, 10 o'clock. Time for this good girl to go to bed." "Jordan's going to play in the tournament tomorrow," Daisy explained. "Oh, you're Jordan Baker." Now I understood why her face looked familiar. I'd seen her in pictures from high society events. There were stories about her too, not all pleasant, but I had forgotten them. "Good night," she said softly. "Wake me at 8, won't you?" "If you'll get up." "I will. Good night, Mr. Carraway. See you soon." "Of course," Daisy said. "In fact, I think I'll arrange a marriage. Come over often, Nick. I'll sort of, fling you together. You know, lock you in a linen closet and push you out to sea in a boat." "Good night," called Miss Baker from the stairs. "I haven't heard a word." "She's a nice girl," Tom said after a moment. "They oughtn't to let her run around the country like this." "Who oughtn't to?" Daisy shot back coldly. "Her family. Her family is just her ancient aunt. Besides, Nick's going to look after her, aren't you, Nick? She'll spend lots of weekends out here this summer. I think the home influence will be good for her." Daisy and Tom looked at each other in silence. "Is she from New York?" I asked quickly. "From Louisville. Our white girlhood was spent together there. Our beautiful white—" "Did you have a little heart-to-heart talk on the veranda?" Tom demanded suddenly. "Did I?" Daisy looked at me.
"I can't recall, but I think we talked about the Nordic race. Yes, I'm sure of it. It crept up on us, and before we knew it—"
"Don't believe everything you hear, Nick," he advised me.
I said lightly I hadn't heard anything at all, and soon after I got up to leave. They walked me to the door, standing together in a warm square of light. As I started my car, Daisy suddenly called, "Wait, I forgot to ask you something, and it's important. We heard you were engaged to a girl out west."
"That's right," Tom added kindly. "We heard you were engaged."
"It's libel. I'm too poor." "But we heard it," Daisy insisted, opening up again in her flowery way. "We heard it from 3 people, so it must be true." I knew what they meant, but I wasn't even slightly engaged. Gossip had twisted the truth. One reason I came east. You can't stop hanging out with an old friend just because of rumors, and I had no intention of being talked into marriage. Their interest touched me, making them seem less remote and wealthy. Still, I felt confused and a little disgusted as I drove away. It struck me that Daisy should rush out of the house, baby in arms, but she had no such intentions. As for Tom, the fact that he had some woman in New York felt less surprising than his annoyance over a book. Something was gnawing at him, making him nibble on stale ideas, as if his proud ego could no longer satisfy his heart. By now, it was deep summer. The roads were alive, lit up in pools of light, and when I arrived back in West Egg, I parked my car under the shed. I sat for a while on an old grass roller in the yard. The wind had calmed, leaving behind a bright night with sounds of life in the trees. I noticed a figure emerge from the shadow of Gatsby's mansion. With hands in his pockets, he gazed at the stars. Something about his relaxed stance suggested he was content alone. He stretched his arms toward the dark water in a strange way, and far away, I thought I saw him trembling. I glanced out at the water and noticed a single green light, tiny and far away, perhaps the end of a dock. When I turned to look for Gatsby again, he had vanished into the night, leaving me alone in the restless darkness.